Can I ask Nigel Hancock, who we all must also salute for having organised this year-long event and this particular ceremony, to introduce and talk about our next book.
Thank you again, Robert. Incidentally, there's a book that was out earlier this year called Jazz and Cricket, and I'm looking for a reviewer for the journal. So perhaps Duncan's put his hand up, and I can approach him to review that for me. I'm introducing the fourth book, and I'm holding it up there. It's called Cricket Country: An Indian Odyssey in the Age of Empire by Prashant Kidambi, published by Oxford University Press. Prashant is sitting in a room about 2 or 3 miles from me, as it happened. He hails from the School of History at Leicester University, where he is an associate professor in colonial urban history. The book, a few years in the making, sets the story of the first All India tour of Britain in 1911 in a much wider context, with cricket as the prism through which Prashant examines so much more. He looks at all that was going on in the early years of Indian history. He looks at the actual tour itself. He looks very much at a lot of the individuals involved in the tour, and he puts it in a wider historical and social context. The judges enjoyed it. They found it a revelatory account, that it was well researched and written, and it was historical scholarship that was accessible to the general reader. And I think that's a great art. I personally enjoyed it as much as any book about Indian cricket, since Ramachandra Guha's A Corner of a Foreign Field, The Indian History of a British Sport, which won this prize back in 2002. So welcome, Prashant. Your book has been widely acclaimed. Notably, it was the first sports history book to be shortlisted for the prestigious Wolfson History Prize. So it's not the first shortlist you've been on recently. How do you feel about being on this shortlist?
Very thrilled, to be honest. My fellow nominees are writers whose works I've enjoyed greatly. They're a very valuable part of my own cricket collection. And the award itself, I mean, the list of past winners, as you pointed out at the start, includes pretty much, the who's who of cricket writers over the past half century. So frankly, I'm astonished to be on this list and elated, as you can imagine.
Thank you. There's an interesting story about how the book came about. How did the project come about, and what did you set out to achieve with the book?
Yes, I mean, it started off originally as an essay that was commissioned for Wisden in 2011. And the idea behind that came from Ramachandra Guha and Shield Berry, who was then the editor of Wisden. And they wanted me to write an essay to mark the centenary of the first All India Cricket Tour of Britain, which took place in 1911. And so that was the idea, to write that essay, and that's how I began to research it. And it was going to be, I mean, the essay itself focused more on the cricket, but as I began to do the research, it became clear that there was a book in here, and a book besides that would have to be on a much wider canvas. I then began to sort of do more research around it and fleshing out the wider context of it, and which is what took a lot of the time. And the aim was to set the tour itself within its larger historical setting. And as it evolved, it really became a story about, how the idea of India took shape on the cricket pitch in the high noon of empire, and how that was a story that was also the story of both Indian and English cricket, their mutually intertwined relationship.
Yeah. In the course of the book, you do bring to life a lot of characters. You talk about the makeup of the team, the individuals, their backgrounds, their racial background in particular. You cover Ranji, who of course is a well-known cricketer, but primarily an English cricketer rather than an Indian cricketer. And two of the people you look at are the Baloo brothers. One of them has been termed the first great Indian cricketer, Prashant Kidambi. Can you say a bit about him and his importance to your narrative and analysis?
Yeah. Well, as you point out, the Palwankar brothers are a very central part of the book. I think one of the things I was trying to show in this book is how, even though it was a book about the relationship between cricket, nation, and empire, cricket also was very closely intertwined with the creation of different kinds of community identities. That's why the book begins with the story of Parsi cricket. And the middle sections of the book also draw in the history of Muslim cricket, or as it came to be known, Muslim cricket in colonial India. The third strand was, of course, the story of the Palwankar brothers, who came from a caste which was associated with leather work, which was regarded by upper caste Hindus as polluting, and they were, defiling activity, and they were socially discriminated against. So it was an extraordinary story of a person breaking through the history of oppression and inequity to make his mark on the cricket pitch. And it was not simply him, it was also his brothers. And Balu, who was well past his best when he came on this tour, still turned out to be the most successful player, as indeed was his brother. And both the brothers indeed end up being the stars of the tour in a context where the other Indian cricketers didn't quite come off. So it's a really amazing story of overcoming, of ability overcoming all kinds of barriers, social barriers, and proving itself on the cricket pitch.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to read, and I commend it to watchers. Finally, that cricket in 1911 was a bit different to what we've just seen in Pune, and we'll be seeing soon in the IPL and later this summer in England when India come over for 5 tests, etc. How did the tourists fare in 1911, and what's the lasting significance of the tour as a whole?
Well, the tourists didn't start off very well, and as I show in the book, that had more to do with that had both to do with what was going on the field of play, where you had the introduction of new inventions, like the googly and swing bowling and so on, which they were unfamiliar with. It also had to do with power relations off the pitch, and in a sense, it shows how sporting performance is always tied up with a larger political context in which it happens. But as the tour progressed, they began to do better. Initially, they'd been pitted against the strongest county sides. They didn't play test matches. They pitted against the strongest county sides, and they lost. But then gradually, as they began to as the tour went on, they began to find their feet. And towards the end, they started performing much better. So on the whole, the tour was a disappointment for those who thought that the Indians would sort of perform very impressively against the strong county teams, and they didn't. But they did retrieve some of their honor towards the end. In terms of its long-term significance, I think there are many ways in which it's significant. One is that it marks India's entry into the empire of cricket. It marks, in many ways, the way in which India was drawn into the cricketing world. This is the start of that. You have, in the figure of Ranji, you have the inauguration of the so-called superstar culture that's still very much a part of Indian cricket. The tour was sponsored by Indian businessmen working in tandem with princes and other British publicists. So it also points to the role of money in the making of cricket in India, and which has, of course, now become very important in ensuring India's own status as the cricketing superpower today. The game was, most of the players were drawn from the middle class, from middle-class backgrounds, and that is also a trend that has continued. Though, of course, we now have more players coming from smaller towns and so on. But in fact, even the first tour, the 1911 tour, had 3 or 4 players who were from smaller towns, and of course, it reinforces again how cricket and politics in the subcontinent have been absolutely intertwined right from the beginning. And cricket's charisma in the subcontinent, I argue, is essentially a function of the political place it has had in the history of modern India.
Well, thank you very much for writing it, and congratulations on being on the shortlist. And just for everyone's information, in the chat list there is details about how to acquire all of these books. We'll also be making those same details available to Cricket Society and MCC members subsequently. Thank you, Prashant, and back to Robert.
Thank you very much, and congratulations, Prashant, on a lovely story and a lovely book.